Hey, you lovely lot. Welcome back to Crime Analyst and the Intelligence Cell. And I want to just start off by saying a huge thank you to all of you who have subscribed, all of you who've watched my videos. If you haven't subscribed just yet, please do hit the button. It really does make a big difference. And also, huge thanks for the super thanks that people have shown such generosity, and I really appreciate it. And please do continue by all means. And I've also joined Buy Me a Coffee. You can buy me a coffee. It's thirsty work, all of this. I've got my Crime Analyst cup here. And I've also got my mug here, which is empty. So buy me a coffee. All this campaigning and being an advocate is thirsty work. So that would be hugely appreciated. And thank you for voting for Crime Analyst in the Listener's Choice True Crime Awards. There's still time to vote. Please do. It really makes a huge difference to an independent podcaster like me, where I do everything pretty much myself, bar my amazing audio engineer, Jason, and Chris, who does my graphics, and I do the rest, and it takes a lot of time, and I'm up against the big studios and production companies. And yes, I was delighted to be nominated and shortlisted for 3 other awards. I did drop a little video about that, so please watch and do listen to my most recent episode of Crime Analyst on the podcast, where I take you inside an investigation, a hunt for a very prolific and dangerous serial rapist. And I talk with one of my former colleagues who I worked with on that investigation, and you'll hear much more about the analytical processes involved in a major operation like that, which spanned at least 3 police forces to begin with. So do take a listen, let me know what you think. And I'm going to today be talking about, we're going to go to New South Wales in Australia, and I want to talk about the horrific double murder of 26-year-old Jesse Baird and 29-year-old Luke Davies, which has really rocked so many people and devastated so many people. And my goodness, I mean, it's just a case that the deeper you dig into it, the worse the allegations and revelations are. And a Senior Constable Beau Lamarre-Condon, a 28-year-old New South Wales police officer, has been charged with the double murder. And he allegedly shot Jesse and Luke on the 19th of February in Jesse's home, his Paddington house, a terraced house, and he shot them with his police-issued Glock. And gosh, I mean, it makes me just take a massive intake of breath, because it's just such a huge betrayal of trust. And this is one of the worst acts of power and control. And I say allegedly one of the worst acts, but I'm also thinking about Wayne Couzens, who abducted, raped and killed Sarah Everard in London at the time of one of the lockdowns 2 years ago. And he was a serving Metropolitan Police officer. And it's just now that the findings are coming out. We've had Baroness Louise Casey's review, but now we've got another report that's 2 years down the line, 370 odd pages, which I'll be going through in more detail, showing all the failures. And here in Australia, we have another situation that's unfolded, and it really does impact trust and confidence. And firstly, I just want to make that point that I acknowledge that it shatters trust and confidence, and it is utterly repugnant and reprehensible, and questions have to be asked about vetting of how someone like Beau Lamarre-Condon or Wayne Couzens, how they get into the police service. And the psychometric assessments have to be looked at, and I think we should be looking at power and control related behaviours and crimes like coercive control and stalking, looking at the red flag behaviours and misogyny as well. Those sorts of traits and behaviours aren't tested for, and it's about time that they were, so that we ensure these individuals do not make it into a police service where they are armed. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my thoughts on the case, but I want to share with you firstly what I have learned about Jesse and Luke from watching a lot of footage and listening to their friends who've talked out about them. And I also want to go through the timeline, and I want to just say how the case came on my radar, first of all, because it was actually through many of you. And I really am thankful that so many of you are active and you message me and you let me know about the cases that you want me to talk about, and this was one of them. So it came on my radar because you messaged me saying, look at what the Commissioner of New South Wales Police has said, Karen Webb. And she commented on this case, and she said, she called it a crime of passion. And I just want to give the full context of what she was what it was relating to, because the gay community were basically saying they didn't want New South Wales Police at Mardi Gras, which has just been. And you can understand why they felt that way. Well, there's multiple layers to it. It's not just about Beau Lamarre-Condon and the horrific acts that he allegedly did and carried out. It's also, there's a much bigger picture about a hate crime inquiry report that was published at Christmas, which related to many cases between 1970 and 2010 being looked at by Justice John Sacker, and this inquiry and finding that New South Wales Police had failed to investigate in most of those cases. And like I said, it was the world's first hate crime inquiry of this nature, where they found that New South Wales Police were adversarial, they were defensive, they didn't acknowledge their failures, the families had been horribly let down. And that context is a very important one. It's a backdrop to why people in the gay community in New South Wales just feel so upset and angry, because this has been going on for decades, that they've been discriminated against, and it was known that there were instances and situations where gay men were being attacked and the police did nothing. There were also cases that were ruled suicides when they were never even investigated. And I'm thinking about Scott Johnson, who was found in 1988 at the bottom of Manly Cliffs, and the police immediately said it was a suicide without any investigation. And yet his brother Steve, who I met in December with Sally Layden, Marion's daughter, he told me this horror story of how he and his family had been treated, and that when he went to Australia asking questions, because he lives here in LA, he was met with a blue wall of silence and officers closed ranks, and he was just asking the basic questions and they wouldn't listen to him. And it actually turned out that Scott was murdered, and the perpetrator, Scott White, was sentenced on May 3rd, 2022 to 12 years and 7 months. And the police really have to do better. So that's some of the context. And Commissioner Karen Webb was saying that they wanted to go to Mardi Gras, and she said, and I'm going to quote her, I'd hate to see us excluded because of actions of one person that is not gay related. This is a crime of passion, we will allege. Well, I mean, take another deep breath, because before I get into the victimology and timeline, I just want to make comment that crime of passion is totally outdated terminology that should never be used. What we often see with cases is when crime of passion is used, it's often a male perpetrator, which can romanticize and minimize their behavior and actions and make it seem like some kind of passionate act, where actually most often it's about power and control related behavior and a taking of control by doing the absolutely worst act. And it's unfathomable to many, but I've seen it in many domestic violence and coercive control related cases. The other thing we don't want to do is give the perpetrator a defense by saying that. And the psychopathology is much more about, if I can't have you, no one can, and taking revenge and control. And oftentimes there's premeditation and there's planning. So it's not just an act in the moment. And ironically, New South Wales Police are alleging that this was a premeditated and pre-planned act. So they can't have it both ways. And I will keep saying they will allege, because in Australia you have to make that clear. He has been charged, Beau Lamarre has been charged, but he will be going to court in April, and he has not entered his plea as yet, and of course he is not convicted. So that's why it's important to say allegedly. And yes, there is a lot of evidence that points in his direction, which I am going to explain. So firstly, I want to talk about victimology. Jesse, 26-year-old Jesse, was a former TV presenter. He presented Totally Wild, very adventurous, being outdoors, a fun program. And he also presented Gamify. So there's lots of footage of Jesse online, this very vibrant and fun and sporty and handsome and positive person who qualified as an AFL umpire, and he also won the Brian Pratt Medallion for the most promising umpire in 2020 and 2021. And I've heard from some of you who knew him, and I really appreciate you painting a picture of what he was like. And Luke Davies, he was having a relationship with Luke Davies. 29-year-old Luke was cabin crew staff for Qantas Airlines. He was passionate about life and travel and was a fun guy, a very generous person, and a really just lovely, lovely soul. Both of them were, and they're going to be hugely missed. And so too, what connects Beau Lamarre-Condon with both Jesse and Luke? Well, it's believed that with Jesse there was some form of intimacy, whether it was friends with benefits, I'm not sure. I've read so many conflicting things. One of his good friends said that they weren't in a relationship. He basically said that it was an on and off romance. Sorry, he didn't say it was an on and off romance, other people did. Corey Dean Thorpe said they weren't in a relationship, but he had helped him, Jesse, draft a message to Lamarre asking him to refrain from contacting him because there was stalking related behaviours. And other people have told me there's pictures of Beau Lamarre and Jesse at Lamarre's mother's birthday, and that there was an intimacy there, and the relationship was off, and Jesse had started seeing Luke and it had ended badly, and that Beau Lamarre-Condon, what we now know from multiple sources, from Jesse's mother, who told police when he was missing that if anything happened to him it would be a police officer, New South Wales police officer called Beau, and that he would be responsible. And others have talked about the stalking behaviour. And with that, I'm talking about Jesse saying that he was being followed, that his car was being keyed, that his car had water poured in the engine, that a man appeared in his bedroom, and his phone had gone missing. There were lots of things that had happened. And normally with stalking, you get at least 100 contacts before someone calls the police, but Jesse didn't call the police, and I think New South Wales police need to think about that, why he didn't feel safe enough to call them. And obviously Beau Lamarre-Condon was a police officer, but they have to up their game if they want to restore trust and confidence. That's a really important component here. And I want to talk about the timeline because it really does have all the hallmarks of a murder in slow motion. And Jesse was talking about being stalked in August. And February 5th was really when Jesse and Luke made their relationship public on social media. You've then got Valentine's Day on February the 14th. That can always trigger terrible behaviour and stalking related behaviour. That's why we've always done a lot of campaigns around Valentine's Day. And what we do know is that February the 18th, Jesse and Luke were out with friends. And on February the 19th, the Monday morning at around 10 a.m, they were shot dead. And neighbours said that they heard gunshots at Jesse's Paddington house, which is a terraced house, and they didn't report it. I can't talk to why they didn't. There's lots of bystander issues, but I wish that they had. There was also at 9:54 an emergency call, a 000 call, similar to a 911 or 999, and it was made from Luke's phone. And the call handler heard someone say, a male voice, "Get out, F off." And then the call went dead. Now, apparently they tried to call back the person and they got no response. And I can't tell you what happened with the follow-up. I would imagine it should have been treated as urgent. I mean, I wrote the book Policing Domestic Violence, it's behind me, and we talk about call handlers and when calls are hung up or you hear expletives or you hear breathing. Of course, you have to think about domestic violence and send a unit round. But I can't say how many calls they'd received that morning. But it is very concerning because it was a terraced row of houses. Well, later that evening, New South Wales police alleged that Lamarre allegedly hired a white van from near Sydney Airport, and the next morning he went round to the address and he had put the bodies in surfboard bags, and he put them into the van and drove them away. And in between that, the housemates, the flatmates of Jesse, 2 women had gone back to the house that evening at about 8 o'clock, and they apparently saw these surfboard bags, and they touched them, or one of them did, prodded them, didn't really know what they were, took 3 photos of them, so obviously felt there was something worrying and concerning. And they looked at, there was a red stain on the floor outside on the patio. They thought maybe it was beetroot that had been spilled. I just wish that there'd been a follow-up from New South Wales Police and phone calls from the neighbours and the housemates, but that all needs to be looked at. And going back to the timeline, what the police are then alleging, they put out a police fact sheet of the time, date, stamp of things, that on Tuesday the 20th, that Beau Lamarre drives to Bungonia, which is basically about 2 hours away, in this van, and that he goes to a store, buys an ankle grinder, a padlock, and he has a female former colleague in the van, and he breaks into a property, and I don't know what she was doing, only the police have said that she is not going to be charged and that he was a lone actor. And he spent some time in this property. It looks quite like a wooded area in some parts, and brush and swampy. And at 11 o'clock that night, he buys weights from a department store, and that's important. And on Wednesday the 21st, he then drives to Sydney and then on to Newcastle, where he goes to see a former police colleague, a female. He asks for a hose to clean the van. And he cleans the van. He ends up staying the night with her in Newcastle, and she is disturbed by some of the things that he's said. He said, "It's me, but it's not me." And he talked about bodies not sinking, and she called that into Crime Stoppers. And on the Wednesday, I should also mention that on the Wednesday the 21st, a worker had found items in a skip in Cronulla, and he had found bloody clothing and ID, I think it was wallets and watches, and he then called the police. And that's really when the manhunt began. And the missing person inquiry started in earnest thereafter. And what we know is, or what's alleged, I should say, by the female police officer, she's very concerned, or the former police officer, I should say, very concerned about what she was told. And on the 23rd of February, so the next day at around 10:30 a.m, Beau Lamarre hands himself in at Bondi Police Station, and he is arrested and he's charged with 2 counts of murder. He's remanded and he appears in court that same afternoon, and then he's uncooperative with the police. And what we now know is that 4 days later, he told the police where the bodies were, and the police went to Bungonia, to the property, to Bungonia, I should say, the property, and they found the surfboard bags with Luke and Jesse's bodies within them. They'd been covered with debris, so he had attempted to conceal the bodies. Now, I don't know why he changed his mind. I know that Detective Constable Sasha Pinazza, who I've come across in Marion Barter's case, she was the one who interviewed Rick Blum. She was involved, and also Lamarre spoke with his lawyer, and I wonder whether they pressured him to say and give up where the bodies were. And I also just feel there's something going on in the background regarding, and I felt this before, regarding family members as well. And I found out that Lamarre's mother was very high up, very senior in New South Wales Police, as I believe it's a civil member of staff. And his sister also worked in New South Wales Police. I don't know whether there was pressure placed that, that on in terms of his family members being looked at, the other women that he had involved. I don't know why he involved other women. He certainly went off on Saturday, the 17th. He bought a surfboard bag, one. So 2 days before the murder, we know that he bought also one of the bags afterwards. So that points to premeditation and planning, allegedly, the police say. But I do just wonder, because he did go and see other women, certainly a former female police colleague, why did he involve her and the former colleague who was in the van with him? And of course, that means that they could end up being seen as complicit in this. So I wonder whether there was some pressure placed there. But I do take umbrage with the fact that, again, the police commissioner, Karen Webb, turned round and said that she was grateful to him for saying where the bodies were. And I guess this could just be very clumsy language again. But, you know, potentially the bodies may not have ever been found. And so maybe she was expressing relief that the bodies were found and that the families could be with their beloved boys and men and could bury them. And that was important for the family. But her language was really, again, just appalling. You know, you have to say that it is a betrayal of trust, and you are shocked and you are horrified when one of your own has been charged with a double murder like this. But that's not the language that was used. And although she has pledged that they must look at the firearms issue, because, again, in the timeline, he took his firearm out days before. And apparently there's some who say that there was a protest that he was meant to be attending on the weekend, but the fact that the firearm was missing and there was no follow-up and he wasn't questioned about it, there should have been checks and balances in place, and that should have been a big red flag. And when looking at his history, I mean, this was a man who stalked celebrities, and he would pitch up outside their hotels and try and get pictures with them, and was posting on Instagram as if he knew celebrities like Kim Kardashian and Taylor Swift and Harry Styles. And his Instagram looked like he was living this incredible life, where actually he was living with his mum in her house. So again, there's a disconnect here on screening. I feel that these are red flags and warning signs. But certainly Karen Webb talked about there being a review of the firearms issue. But I think it's much bigger than this. I actually feel that they should be thinking about vetting, particularly related to stalking and coercive control and misogyny and male entitlement and the levels of arrogance. I think that has to be looked at, and it's not really in a lot of the psychometric testing. I think new tests need to be devised to really draw out these individuals. And also, I think it's very important that New South Wales Police think about the learning regarding coercive control and stalking and domestic violence cases and risk assessment and language. There is so much learning with this case, particularly when, again, just to go back to vetting, I was informed that Lamarre was just about to transfer to the Protections Operations Unit, which, I mean, my goodness, what a red flag. Just like Wayne Couzens was in the Royalty and Diplomatic Protection, dealing with parliamentary with MPs, he got himself a job there with this individual, same kind of ilk, and that was the unit, the Protections Operations Unit, that would look after international protected persons and public dignitaries who are at risk. So a really serious and important job, and we have to think about perpetrators gravitating to those sorts of roles. So there's so much learning here. I've really just scratched the surface, but I wanted to pass comment and tell you about what I've uncovered about the timeline and the victimology and the behaviour. And I know none of this is of comfort to Jesse and Luke's family and friends, and I know that they will be greatly missed, and they just seem like such tremendous human beings who had so much to give and the rest of their lives ahead of them. So I want to end thinking about Jesse and Luke and their family and friends and everybody who loved them. Until next time, be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instincts.